Amina had always been a calm and gentle girl, someone who believed that life had a way of settling down even after difficult days. She grew up in a small village surrounded by wide desert land, where people knew each other by name, and every morning smelled of warm sand and fresh tea. Her childhood was peaceful, filled with evenings of sitting under the open sky and listening to her father tell stories about travelers who crossed the desert and returned with tales of courage and hope. But as she grew older, life slowly changed for her. In her village, families often made decisions based on tradition, and Amina's life was no exception. Her marriage was arranged when she was still trying to understand what she wanted for her future. Her family assured her that everything would be fine and that her new life would bring comfort and stability. Amina trusted them because she had always respected her parents, and she believed they wanted what was best for her. Her husband's family lived in a different part of the desert, several days away. When she first arrived at their home after her wedding, she tried her best to adjust. She woke up early, helped with chores, spoke kindly, and showed respect. But no matter how hard she tried, her in-laws rarely appreciated her efforts. They criticized her cooking, her silence, her way of doing daily tasks, and sometimes even her appearance. Amina kept her feelings inside, believing patience would make things better one day. A few months later, Amina discovered she was pregnant. When she learned the news, her heart filled with both fear and happiness. She dreamed of holding her child and giving them a life full of warmth and love. She hoped that maybe this child would help her in-laws soften and accept her with more kindness. But instead of showing joy, her in-laws reacted coldly. They blamed her for different things that went wrong in their home. If the weather changed, they said she brought unluckiness. If a goat got sick, they whispered that she carried bad signs. None of these things made sense, and Amina knew deep in her heart that she had done nothing wrong. Still, she did not speak back. She simply lowered her gaze and tried to remain calm. One morning, after a small misunderstanding in the house, her in-laws decided they had had enough. They told Amina they would take her back to her parents' village, but they did not give her time to pack properly, nor did they explain why they were behaving so harshly. Their decision felt sudden, rushed, and filled with frustration rather than understanding. They brought out a wagon used for traveling across the desert. The wagon was old but sturdy, pulled by two tired-looking animals. Amina stood quietly beside it, holding her little cloth bag with a few clothes inside. She hoped someone would speak to her gently, but no one did. Her mother-in-law looked at her with a firm expression. "You will go home," she said. "It is better for everyone." Amina nodded softly. She thought maybe going back to her family would give her a chance to rest and feel safe again. She was ready to climb onto the wagon when she felt something unexpected. Instead of being helped onto the seat, her in-laws brought out a long rope. Her heart trembled. She did not understand what they were doing. They tied the rope loosely around her wrists and fixed the other end to the side of the wagon. It was not tight enough to hurt her, but it was enough to stop her from stepping away. She knew they did it not out of care, but out of distrust, as if they feared she would choose her own direction instead of theirs. Amina wanted to ask why this was necessary, but she stayed silent. She did not want to argue or create more trouble. She simply looked down at the sand and tried to take slow breaths. She told herself that she needed to stay calm for the sake of her unborn child. She placed her hand on her belly, whispering inside her heart, "I am here. I will stay strong." The journey began slowly. The wagon moved forward with a hesitant rhythm, wheels pressing into the soft sand. The desert stretched endlessly around them, an ocean made of golden grains instead of water. The sky was wide and smooth, without a single cloud. It looked peaceful, but the heat was harsh. As the hours passed, Amina felt the sun burning on her back. The rope irritated her skin slightly, and her throat became dry. She asked for water, and after a long moment, her sister-in-law handed her a small flask without saying a word. Amina sipped carefully to make it last. She watched the desert carefully. Even though it seemed empty, she knew it held secrets, small plants hidden under the sand, insects that knew how to survive the heat, and distant birds that flew in groups. She watched them to distract herself from the heaviness inside her chest. During the journey, her in-laws whispered among themselves. Their voices carried frustration, tiredness, and impatience. They blamed each other for the long trip, the heat, and even their decision. They did not include Amina in any conversation. She was simply a passenger, brought along without choice. Still, she did not let hopelessness take over. She thought about her childhood home, the familiar smell of her mother's cooking, her father's gentle voice, and the way her younger siblings ran around the courtyard. She imagined their faces lighting up when they saw her return. That thought brought a small spark of comfort in her heart. But the desert was not an easy companion. As the day grew longer, the heat became almost unbearable. Even the animals pulling the wagon struggled, slowing down and breathing heavily. The wheels sank deeper into the sand, making the wagon tilt slightly each time. Amina felt her feet dragging softly across the warm grains. Her in-laws grew more irritated. They argued about whether they should stop and rest, or keep pushing forward before evening. Amina listened quietly, hoping they would choose to rest. But they kept moving. The journey felt endless. By late afternoon, the harsh sun softened a little, but Amina's body felt weaker. She feared for her baby, worrying that the stress might affect the child. She placed her hand on her belly again and whispered in her heart, "Stay with me. I will protect you." She lifted her gaze toward the horizon. The desert did not change much, just lines of sand that rose and fell gently like waves. But every time the wind blew, the sand shifted, creating new shapes. It felt as if the land moved with her, giving her silent company. As evening slowly approached, a light wind brushed across her face, giving her a brief sense of relief. The sky began to turn a mild orange, and the shadows grew longer. But her in-laws did not stop the wagon. Instead, they pushed forward, wanting to cover more distance before nightfall. Amina's body swayed with each movement of the wagon. She felt a mix of exhaustion and determination. Even though her hands were tied and her journey was controlled by others, her spirit refused to break. She believed that the desert, which looked so harsh and endless, had a quiet side too, one that protected people who moved with patience and hope. She did not know how or when things would change, but she believed something within the desert's silence was watching over her. With that deep and quiet faith, she continued her journey, the rope still tied around her, the wagon pulling her forward, and the setting sun casting long shadows behind her. She did not realize that this endless desert, which seemed so unforgiving, would soon become the very force that would turn her life in a completely different direction, one she could never have imagined. The second day of the journey began before sunrise. The sky was still dark when Amina heard the soft movements of her in-laws preparing the wagon. She had barely slept. The desert night was cold, and even though they had wrapped themselves in blankets, she was left with only a thin cloth around her shoulders. She shivered often, trying to keep warm, and held her knees close to her chest. The rope around her wrists made it difficult to rest comfortably, so she simply waited for morning. When the first light appeared at the edge of the sky, the desert slowly turned from gray to gold. Amina watched the colors change, trying to find peace in the quiet beauty around her. She reminded herself that staying calm was important not just for her, but for the life growing inside her. Her in-laws spoke little that morning. They were tired and in no mood for conversation. After a quick breakfast of dry bread and water, they tied the rope again and prepared to move. Amina quietly stood beside the wagon, ready for another long day. The wheels began to roll as the sun rose higher, and soon the heat returned with its full strength. The desert looked endless. Stretching in every direction, the sand shimmered, and the air above the ground wavered like water. Amina felt sweat forming on her forehead. She wiped it away gently and looked ahead, trying to stay focused. Hours passed slowly. The sun kept climbing, and the temperature grew harsher. The animals pulling the wagon struggled again, their steps becoming heavier. Even Amina's in-laws began to show signs of discomfort. They squinted their eyes, covered their heads with cloth, and complained quietly about the heat. But Amina had something they did not have, a calm patience learned from years of observing the desert while growing up. She knew the land had two faces, one that challenged you, and one that protected those who respected it. Even though her condition was difficult, she tried to move gently and breathe slowly. She knew that panicking would only make things harder. As the day grew hotter, the group decided to take a short break under a low hill of sand that gave a little shade. Amina sat on the ground, feeling the coolness beneath the surface. She leaned back slightly and closed her eyes for a moment, imagining she was back home, listening to her mother's voice calling her for lunch. The memory made her eyes fill with emotion, but she quickly wiped it away before anyone noticed. Her in-laws argued again during the stop. They disagreed on the direction, on how far they should travel that day, even on how much food they had left. Every small thing became a reason for them to raise their voices. Amina stayed silent, watching them from a distance. She wondered how people could travel together, yet carry so little understanding between them. When the break ended, the rope was tied again, and they resumed their journey. This time, the sand felt softer, making the wagons sink deeper. The wheels struggled to move forward smoothly, creating a rough motion that made Amina lose her balance more than once. Each time she stumbled, she caught herself carefully to avoid falling. Despite her exhaustion, Amina kept reminding herself strength comes little by little, like small drops of water that fill a cup. She placed her hand gently on her belly and whispered a silent promise that she would not give up. The desert wind began to pick up. At first, it was a gentle breeze, cool and refreshing compared to the heat. But slowly, the wind grew stronger. The sand started lifting from the ground, moving across the air like thin sheets. Amina felt grains brushing against her face. She blinked rapidly to keep them out of her eyes. Her in-laws grew restless. They looked around the sky, trying to judge whether the wind would settle or worsen. The desert was unpredictable, and they knew it. One moment the land looked quiet, and the next, a storm could rise without warning. By late afternoon, the wind turned sharper. Sand began to swirl in small circles, dancing across the land. The sky lost its clear color and took on a pale brown shade. Amina's heart tightened. She had experienced sandstorms before, but never while traveling like this. The wagon struggled forward as the wind pushed from the side. Her in-laws tried to cover their faces with cloth and urged the animals to move faster. But the animals resisted, frightened by the shifting sand. Their cries filled the air, mixing with the increasing sound of wind. Amina looked up and saw the horizon disappearing behind a thick curtain of moving sand. The world slowly turned blurry. She could barely see the wagon, the animals, or even her own hands. She felt the rope tug against her wrists as the wagon jerked suddenly. Her mother-in-law shouted something, but the wind swallowed her voice before it reached Amina. The storm grew louder, like a deep roaring sound that drowned everything else. Within minutes, the storm hit at full force. Sand rose high into the air, spinning violently. The wind pushed against her so strongly that she lost her balance and fell to her knees. The rope tightness increased as the wagon moved unevenly. Amina tried to shield her face with her arms, but the sand still found its way through every small opening. Her in-laws panicked. They tried pulling the wagon to one side, hoping to find shelter behind a dune, but the storm was too powerful. The animals turned in confusion, making the wagon slide diagonally. A loud creaking sound came from the wood as the wheels scraped against the uneven ground. Amina felt fear spreading inside her, but she forced herself to stay calm. She had learned long ago that fear only made the storm feel stronger. She reminded herself that storms, no matter how big, eventually passed. The wind pushed harder. The sand covered the ground like a moving blanket. Amina's in-laws shouted again, their voices breaking in the storm. She could barely see them now. They were nothing more than hazy shapes through the thick cloud of sand. Suddenly, a strong gust hit the side of the wagon, causing it to tilt. The rope around her wrists loosened slightly as the wagon shifted. Amina felt herself being pulled forward, but she dug her feet into the sand to steady herself. Her heart pounded. She looked around, trying to locate her in-laws, but they had moved far ahead, barely visible through the storm. The sound of the wind drowned everything, making the world feel empty and loud at the same time. The storm grew even stronger, turning the desert into a world of swirling dust. The light faded, and the air looked darker. Amina held the rope with her tied wrists, trying not to fall again. She prayed silently, asking for strength, asking for protection. Minutes felt like hours. Then, as suddenly as it came, the storm began to slow. The wind softened slightly. The sand in the air thinned enough for shapes to appear again. Amina coughed gently as she wiped her eyes, but something was different. The wagon had stopped moving. The rope around her wrists felt loose, almost slipping away. And her in-laws were nowhere near her, not even as blurry shapes. The storm had separated them. Amina looked around, her breath unsteady. The desert was quiet again. But nothing looked the same. The sand had shifted into new shapes, covering old tracks. The wagon was half buried on one side. Its wheels stuck. She was alone. The rope that once held her tightly had loosened because of the storm's force. Amina slowly lifted her hands and realized she could slide the rope off with a bit of effort. She pulled gently, and the rope finally slipped free. For the first time since the journey began, her hands were free. She looked up at the vast desert around her. She did not know where her in-laws were or how far the storm had carried them. But as she stood there with the soft wind touching her face, she felt a strange and peaceful thought rise inside her. The desert had taken them away and left her standing on her own. Amina stood in the quiet desert, trying to understand what had just happened. The storm had been so strong that it felt like the sky itself had opened. Now, everything around her looked different. The sand that once lay flat was piled in small hills, and the wind carried only a soft whisper instead of a loud roar. Her heart still beat fast from the fear she had felt during the storm. For a moment, she simply stood still. The rope that had been tied around her wrists was now lying on the sand, loose and harmless. She picked it up and looked at it, not with anger, but with disbelief. This small piece of rope had controlled her fate for so long, and now it lay powerless at her feet. Amina dropped it gently, letting the wind carry away the grains of sand that stuck to it. She looked around. No familiar voices. No sound of the wagon. No figures in sight. Her in-laws had vanished somewhere far away, carried by the storm to an unknown part of the desert. She did not know where they were, and she could not even guess the direction. The storm had erased all tracks, like someone had brushed away everything with a giant hand. Amina felt a wave of fear, but also something completely new. A small spark of freedom. It was surprising, almost confusing. For the first time since the journey had begun, she could move her hands freely. She could walk in any direction she chose. Her life was no longer tied to a wagon or pulled by someone else's decision. But freedom in the desert came with responsibility. She knew she had to be careful. The desert could be kind, but it could also be unforgiving. She could not stand still for too long. She needed to find shelter, water, and a place to rest. Her body was tired, her clothes covered in sand, and her throat felt dry. She touched her belly gently. The child inside her needed safety just as much as she did. That thought pushed her into action. She took a deep breath and began walking. Her feet sank into the soft ground with each step, but she moved slowly and carefully. She scanned the distance, hoping to find a sign, a shadow, a tree, a rock, anything that might guide her. At first, the desert seemed empty. But as she walked, she noticed a faint shape far away. It was small and almost invisible, but it gave her hope. She wasn't sure what it was, but it didn't matter. Anything was better than standing still. She walked toward the shape, step by step. The sun was lowering, and the sky began to soften into warm colors. The cool evening breeze brushed against her face, giving her little bursts of strength. Her body ached, but she kept going. After some time, she realized the shape was larger than she had thought. It looked like a small structure, maybe a temporary shelter or a resting place built by travelers. Her heart lifted. She remembered her father once telling her that nomads built simple shelters for emergency stops. Maybe this was one of them. Encouraged, she walked a little faster. Her legs felt heavy, but her determination helped her move forward. As she approached, she saw that it was indeed a shelter made of dry branches and cloth pieces tied to wooden sticks. It looked old but strong enough to give protection from the desert wind. Amina reached the shelter and stepped inside. The shade immediately cooled her skin. She sat down slowly, leaning against one of the wooden poles. She took a deep breath and felt a moment of comfort she hadn't felt in days. Her hands shook slightly from exhaustion, but her heart felt lighter. She knew she could not stay here forever, but she needed rest. She closed her eyes for a few minutes, listening to the quiet sounds of the desert. It was peaceful now, almost gentle, as if the storm had used all its anger and left behind a calm silence. After a short rest, she searched the shelter. She found a small clay pot near the corner. She opened it carefully and discovered a little water inside, left by travelers who believed in helping others through the desert. Tears filled her eyes. She took only a small sip, saving the rest for later. She knew water was precious. As the evening deepened, Amina felt her body losing strength. She lay down on the soft sand inside the shelter, letting the quiet night guide her into sleep. Her eyes closed peacefully, even though she was alone in the wide desert. She did not know how long she slept. But at some point, she felt movement around her. Soft footsteps, whispering voices. She opened her eyes slowly, frightened for a moment. But then she saw something unexpected. A group of women stood at the entrance of the shelter. They wore colorful scarves wrapped around their heads and long, flowing dresses that rustled softly in the wind. They were nomads, women of the desert, known for their strength and kindness. One of the women knelt beside her, gently touching her arm. Her voice was soft, almost like a mother speaking to a child. "Are you hurt?" she asked kindly. Amina shook her head slowly. She tried to speak, but her throat was too dry. Another woman brought a flask of water and handed it to her. Amina drank carefully, feeling the cool liquid bring life back into her body. The women helped her sit up. Their eyes were filled with concern, but also understanding. Desert people knew how quickly someone could become lost or weak among the shifting sands. Amina whispered a thank you, her voice trembling. The women smiled warmly. They offered her dates and bread, simple food but enough to give her strength. Amina ate slowly, feeling grateful for every bite. One of the women asked, "Where is your family? How did you get here alone?" Amina hesitated. She didn't want to speak badly about anyone. She simply said, "There was a storm. I lost the people I was with. That was enough." The women did not ask more questions. They understood that some stories carried pain, and there was no need to open wounds too soon. The nomads helped her stand. They supported her gently as she walked with them toward their camp. It was not far, just a short distance from the shelter. As they approached, Amina saw several tents arranged in a circle, with small fires burning in the center. The smell of warm food filled the air, and children played nearby, their laughter soft and joyful. The women guided Amina into one of the tents. Inside, it was cozy and clean. They prepared a soft place for her to rest. They gave her clean water to wash the sand from her face and hands. They sat beside her, offering comfort through their presence. For the first time in many weeks, Amina felt truly safe. She finally allowed herself to relax. She leaned back against the pillows and closed her eyes. Her body felt lighter, her breathing calm. She placed her hand gently on her belly. The child inside her responded with a small movement, as if sensing the peace around her. The women noticed and smiled. One of them placed her hand on Amina's shoulder and said softly, "You are safe here. We will take care of you." Amina's eyes filled with quiet tears. She wasn't crying from sadness, but from relief. She had walked through fear, danger, and loneliness, and now she was surrounded by kindness. As night settled around the camp, she felt something she hadn't felt in a long time: hope. The desert, which had once seemed like her greatest enemy, had become the very thing that guided her to safety. and the people she found here felt warm, gentle, and full of compassion. She didn't know what the next day would bring. But she knew one thing for sure: she was no longer alone. Amina woke up the next morning to the soft light of dawn slipping into the tent. For a few seconds, she didn't remember where she was. Her eyes moved across the colorful fabrics hanging inside, the woven mats on the floor, and the faint smell of tea being prepared outside. Then everything returned to her: the storm, the desert, the shelter, and the kind nomad women who had rescued her. She slowly sat up, feeling a slight ache in her muscles from the days of walking and struggling against the harsh weather. But despite the pain, she felt more peaceful than she had felt in a long time. The camp outside was already awake. She could hear the gentle voices of women starting their morning tasks, the laughter of children, and the soft sounds of animals moving around. One of the women who had rescued her stepped inside the tent with a warm smile. "You slept well," she said kindly. "That is good. You needed rest." Amina nodded, giving her a grateful smile. The woman handed her a cup of warm tea. The steam rose gently, carrying a soothing smell that relaxed her. Amina took small sips, feeling the warmth travel through her body. She hadn't realized how drained she was until now. After finishing the tea, the woman helped her outside the tent. The early morning sun made the desert look golden and calm. The wind was cool, and the sky felt wide and open. Amina breathed deeply, letting the fresh air fill her lungs. The nomad women welcomed her with kind faces. They offered her breakfast bread warmed on the fire, dates, and milk. Amina ate slowly. Each bite felt comforting, as though it carried strength she had lost days ago. When she finished, the oldest woman in the group sat beside her. She had sharp eyes but a gentle expression. "You came to us because the desert wanted to guide you," she said softly. "Sometimes the desert tests those who carry hidden strength." Amina bowed her head. She wasn't sure if she believed she had any special strength. But the woman's words touched her heart. The older woman continued, "You are safe now. Stay with us as long as you need. The desert makes families in its own way." Amina smiled softly. She felt welcomed, and she felt something else too, a quiet sense that this place was meant to help her heal. As the day passed, Amina learned more about the nomad group. They were travelers who moved with the seasons, following water sources and grazing land for their animals. Their lives were simple, but peaceful. They respected the land, the sky, and the silence between them. Every member of the group helped one another. Children were cared for by all. Elders were respected, and no one was ever left behind. The women gave Amina a fresh dress made of soft fabric, light enough for the desert heat. They braided her hair and helped her feel more comfortable. She felt like her identity, which had been weighed down by pain and fear, was slowly returning. During the next few days, Amina rested and regained her strength. She spent time sitting with the women while they stitched clothes or prepared meals. She watched the children run with joy through the sand. She listened to the women share stories of past journeys, storms they had survived, and people they had helped along the way. Their kindness was gentle but constant. Every morning, one of the women checked on her, asking how she slept and if she needed anything. They treated her not as a stranger but as someone who belonged among them. And every evening, they invited her to sit around the small fire, where they sang soft songs that floated into the night sky. Amina felt her heart slowly healing. She had escaped fear without even knowing she was escaping. She had walked into safety without knowing she was being guided, and she had found a place where no one judged her or blamed her for things she never caused. One afternoon, as she rested under the shade of a tent, she felt the baby move inside her with an unusual strength. She smiled, placing her hand over her belly. It was as if the child was telling her, "We are safe now." But even though she felt comfortable in the camp, she knew she couldn't stay forever. Her parents didn't know where she was. They didn't know what had happened to her. They would be worried, praying for her safety. The thought of her mother's anxious face and her father's searching eyes filled her heart with emotion. That evening, she approached the older woman who had spoken to her the first morning. "I need to go home," Amina said softly. My family doesn't know where I am. The older woman nodded gently. She had expected this. Your home is not far from here, she said. We often pass near that region. We will help you return. Amina felt a mixture of relief and sadness. She had grown attached to the peace she found here. But she also longed to see her family again. The women prepared supplies for her journey: water, food, a shawl to protect her from the sun, and comfortable sandals. 2 men from the group offered to guide her through the safer paths toward her village. They knew the desert better than anyone, and could travel quickly and wisely. Early the next morning, Amina stood at the edge of the camp, ready to leave. The nomad women surrounded her, each giving her warm blessings and gentle hugs. The older woman placed her hands on Amina's shoulders and said, "The desert protected you because your heart is good. Walk with courage. Your child will be born in safety." Amina's eyes filled with tears. "Thank you," she whispered. "You saved my life." "You saved yourself," the older woman corrected kindly. "We only helped the desert complete its work." With that, Amina began her journey back. The path was smoother because the men guiding her knew every dune, every wind pattern, and every hidden water spot. The days felt shorter because she was no longer afraid. She walked with hope now, not fear. After 2 days of travel, they reached the outskirts of her village. Amina recognized the familiar hills and the wide shade of the old tree where she used to sit during her childhood. Her heart began to race. When she finally saw her home, she stopped. Her parents were standing outside, talking to neighbors. Their faces looked tired and worried, but they held on to each other with quiet strength. Amina took a deep breath and stepped forward. Her mother saw her first. She froze, staring in disbelief. Then, with a cry of relief, she ran toward Amina and hugged her tightly. Tears streamed down both their faces. Her father joined them, holding them both in a firm embrace. They brought her inside, asking what had happened, where she had been, and how she survived. Amina told them the story gently, without bitterness and without blame. She told them about the storm, the shelter, and the kind nomad women who had become a blessing to her in the middle of the desert. Her parents listened with gratitude and amazement. They held her hands and thanked the heavens for bringing her back safely. Amina stayed with her family, finally surrounded by love that felt pure and steady. She spent the next few weeks resting, eating well, and preparing for the arrival of her child. Her days were quiet, filled with calm routines. Her heart felt lighter than it had in a long time. Months later, on a peaceful morning, Amina gave birth to a healthy baby. A child who brought joy into every corner of the home. Her mother held the baby with tears of happiness. Her father whispered prayers of gratitude. Amina looked at her child and smiled. She thought of the desert, of the storm, and of the gentle hands that helped her find her way. The desert had saved her, and now she had a new life full of hope ahead of her. The story she carried was not just one of fear, but of survival, kindness, and unexpected protection. And every time she looked at her child, she remembered the silent promise she had made during that storm. No matter what happens, I will always stay strong.